Hi, welcome back or welcome to my channel. If you're new, my name is Laura. Hi, hello, welcome. Today we are doing my favorite shade per palette in my collection. I did this with like a least favorite and a favorite palette was it last year? I think it was last year. I will link my favorite video or my favorite eyeshadow per palette up in the cards, but I'll link both videos in the description box. My idea is to listen to one of my subscribers' comments over on my community tab, and I'm going to do a comparison of this year and last year, but not in this video. This video is just about my favorite shades per palette, and then we'll talk about the comparison of least and favorite shade, how it differs between 2021. I think it was 2021. If you are interested in seeing and hearing what my favorite shade per palette is in my collection, stick around. If not, I guess if not, bye. But if you are new, I would love it if you guys subscribe to my channel. It does help me out tremendously. Like this video if you like this kind of content, or comment what kind of content you want to see from me. I am always interested in what you guys want to see and filming those videos for your viewing pleasure. I'm going to talk about shades. You're going to see swatch clips go up, and then we'll compare the palette. I filmed the swatch clips, but I haven't compared the two, so I won't be able to do a comparison, but I will be able to show you what my completed color story is for all of my favorite shades. Out of all, I think it's 43 palettes that I have in my collection. It could be 42. I don't know. Let's just talk about the favorite shades per palette. Kicking off with the first letter in the alphabet is my Adept Cosmetics Plain Jane Remastered. Now, this is alphabetical by brand, not palette. So within my Plain Jane Remastered palette, this palette is so stinking pretty, and I'm sure if you are not new to my channel, you probably would guess like, ooh, this shade here, this beautiful green, which has my name written all over it. However, in terms of this palette, I actually love this shade here. It's so unique, and I hope you'll see like all of the crazy, like, oh, it's so beautiful dimension in the swatch clip. But my favorite shade in this palette, ACI 8. So pretty. It is so pretty. I'm so happy to have this palette in my collection. I don't know what Adept did, but I think they probably said some shady thing somewhere, because I heard someone else say like they don't support Adept anymore. I haven't dived into it, so I don't know whether or not I do or don't support them, but I am happy I have this palette in my collection, and ACI 8 is such a stunning shade. Then moving down to a brand that I no longer support, and I know who I no longer support, Anastasia Beverly Hills, and this is my Prism palette. And I know for sure the shade that used to be my favorite is no longer my favorite shade, and it has deeply fallen off of that radar. But for my favorite shade in this palette is the shade Lucid. I just love it. It is like a white gold. It is incredible. It looks kind of similar to the iced out highlight, where it's like white but has that crazy gold flip. It kind of reminds me of that. This thing is so stinking pretty. Moving down to a palette I really haven't given any love. I've literally never used this, so picking my favorite is very like based on the color, based on the formula, based on my swatch. This is a palette that Haley sent me for Christmas, my birthday, sometime at the tail end of last year. This is the Beauty Bakery Bite Size I'm With the Cookie Baking Crew eyeshadow palette. What a long stinking name for this palette. But my favorite shade, again, if you are no stranger to this channel, you know there's a type of shadow that always calls my name, but I never wear it. And it's these minty blues. So I freaking love this shade. This color is so pretty. Have I actually worn this palette? No. So grain of salt for this one. Solely based on the color and like the fact that it's a metallic is why that guy is my favorite in this palette. Moving to a palette that was a frequent flyer in my Pan Those Eyeshadows series last year, and the year before that, I feel like. This is the very worn BH Cosmetics Take Me Back to Brazil palette. This palette is so stinking well loved. I almost put this purple in. However, when I look at this palette, the two shades that really excite me are these two. And I went with the more green of the two. So it's just shade number 5 in the palette, a matte, like chartreusey, limey kind of green. Oh, she's so pretty. It's also hard because I'm always drawn to like these kinds of blues too, but like this green just, oh, she's got me in her like an iron grip. Next BH Cosmetics palette is another one that Haley had sent me. This is the Weekend Vibes Avocado Toast palette, and I feel a little cheap putting this shade in the favorites. However, like when I open this palette, this is truly what my eye is drawn to. However, it's the only shade that I've really truly given any use, and it's the shade Haas. That's in my current Pan Those eyeshadows, so there's gonna be spoilers in this video, by the way, obviously. Haas here is so pretty. It's like that olivey, goldy kind of green that I truly am obsessed with. Like this kind of green is so pretty in my opinion. I am not wearing it today. Actually, I am. On my lower lash line, I have it blended out a smidge, but predominantly this makeup has been on since 5 a.m. and it is 5:30 p.m. now. We worked today. It was a busy day, so my makeup's not looking great and I didn't feel like touching up. The next palette is a C Color Savannah palette. Again, Haley sent me this a lot. I will have the palettes Haley sent me. They'll be listed, like they'll say a note that Haley sent them to me, but thank you, Haley, again. This is a dupe palette to my Safari palette by Natasha Denona. I did a whole video comparing the two, but this is the C Color Savannah palette, a fraction of the price of the Safari palette. But I went ahead and, you know, I actually picked 2 different shades in the 2 different palettes, even though they're dupe palettes. This guy, I love this and this, but this guy won out. So that is, oh, I don't remember. There's no shade names to this, but it's just the 10th shade in the palette. It's a mustard orangey yellow. I love those. Those are some of my favorites. Like, clearly, we love a nice orangey yellow. So this is a palette that my sister-in-law had gifted me when she moved to the States from Japan. This is the Cezanne, I don't know what this is, the Airy Touch eyeshadow quad in the shade number 3. My favorite shade in this, it's just a little quad. I haven't used the whole, like I've used it, but not a lot. My favorite shade is just this like shimmery, mauve-y kind of neutral kind of shade. Just really, really pretty. I need to like try to pan this one day, like, and get not my money's worth, but my sister-in-law's money's worth out of that guy. We go to my ColourPop next, and kicking it off with that is my Bare Necessities palette. Now, this palette is in my Pan Those eyeshadows, so if you don't want a spoiler, just click ahead a little bit. But my favorite shade in this bad boy, very neutral. I almost picked one of these like mauve tones because I was super into those earlier this year. However, my tried and true favorite in this palette reigns still as Rumored. This shade here is so pretty. It's kind of a cool toned leaning like lid shade. That is everyday lid shade, but it's like leans a little cool tone, but like neutral cool. I have a palette that is currently in my Project Level Up. Again, if you don't want spoilers, just click ahead a little bit. But that is the Going Coconuts palette here. My favorite shade in this palette is actually this like flaky. I feel like people don't like this shade because it's a little flaky, but it's so darn intense. I love it. Perfect inner corner shade. Absolutely gorgeous. Super blinding. One of those like white gold kind of shades again. Pretty Guardian palette, Sailor Moon. Now, this one I did not need to think. This was a no-brainer kind of situation for me. When I think of my Pretty Guardian palette, I immediately think of the one color that is my absolute favorite, and that is this shade here called Luna. I am a sucker for any purple shade that has a blue shift. I don't know what it is. Even when I used to not like purples, those shades just suck me in. I hear them singing their siren song. They make me want to get in the water and just go all the way to the bottom. I just love that shade so much. Then moving to a palette that was actually sent to me in PR by Fantasy Cosmetica is the Druid palette. And now if you didn't see, now it's closed at this point. However, I did have a giveaway over on my, oh my gosh, what? It was my top 5 color stories video. I did have a giveaway with this palette, a brand new one for you guys. It's closed at this point, so sorry if you missed out on that, but the Fantasy Cosmetica Druid palette. Now, again, this is another one where if you open this up and look at it, you're going to say, there's like 2 shades that I think Laura would like. And if you guessed the green ones, you were right. But my absolute favorite is this shade called Serenity. It is such a blinding green shade, and it is everything I want to wear at all times. That kind of shade is just so perfect. It's so stunning. I am annoyed at myself for not grabbing for it more. The next frequent flyer in my Pan Those Eyeshadows this year happens to be my Glam Light Ice Cream Dream palette. This thing has been in there. Man, she tried jumping in there for a 4th time, and I was like, sis, you gotta hold on. Absolutely beautiful. I have had mint chocolate, strawberry cheesecake, and blueberry cheesecake all in my Pan Those Eyeshadows, none of which were my favorite shade in the palette. My favorite shade in the palette is going to be Birthday Cake here. I'm a sucker for those kinds of green, kind of minty shades. I just love them so much. It was either Birthday Cake or Red Velvet, because I feel like Red Velvet is just super unique too, but a shimmer's going to win out a matte any day of the week. A palette that hasn't gotten a whole lot of love in my time in my collection is the JOAH Chasing the Sun palette. Now, JOAH sent this over to me after I posted a review of the mascara and lash primer over on my Instagram. There was no obligation to post this, but I do want to let you know, JOAH did send this over to me for free. It kind of gives me Natasha Denona bronze vibes. My favorite out of these 5 is actually this guy, and I have used this palette. I took this with me when I went to Florida back in November to go see my family. The mattes perform incredible. They're soft, they're buttery, they're beautiful. The shimmers leave a little bit to be desired in this palette, but those 2 mattes down here are incredible. So definitely had to be that deepest matte. This guy here, it's just super rich, super, super creamy, super blendable. Then we go through the slew of my Kaleidos makeup palettes. Kicking it off with probably my favorite in the bunch, the Sci-Fi Green. Again, if you know, you know. Laura loves these kinds of shades. I don't know why I'm talking in 3rd person, but I love these kinds of shades so much. Ugh. Favorite guy, Glamora. That green, just stunning. I love this palette. I love that palette so much. Then moving to the Cyber Bronze palette. Again, another Kaleidos palette. I'm actually surprised with the shade I picked. It's not necessarily my favorite shade because of the color, but whenever I think of this palette, I immediately think of this shade and this shade almost only, which is Plasma here, which is not a typical shade that I would normally wear. Just a very bright silver, like a platinum silver kind of shade, but it's so pretty. Then the Astro Pink palette, the number 3 in the series, which looks like this guy, has some pan in the palette. Those shades were in my Pan Those Eyeshadows and then my Fantasy Self Project pan. But my favorite in this, and the one that I immediately think of Neptune. However, that one's a little disappointing. It's like a sheer based shadow. I love the shade Lightyear. That is so blinding, so stunning. The only thing is it kind of reminds me of Plasma, and you can definitely see that in the swatch clip. They are very similar with just a slight tweak on the undertone of them. So would I necessarily put both of those in those slots if I had known that they were so similar? No. VR Neon, which is the 4th one in the series for the Futurism palettes. Now, this one I almost picked. I was like tied between 2, but I went with the shimmery one. So that is what that guy looks like. I almost picked this green shade Glitch. It's just so pretty. However, I went with this guy here, Easter Egg. It's just a shade that I don't have really anywhere else in my collection. I don't have that super like bam in your face fuchsia kind of shade. That's similar to how I feel about the Electro Turquoise palette. There is 2 shades in here where I'm like, ooh, yes, I love these both, but one just went out because it just seemed more impactful. So out of this color story, it was either this shimmery white Shockwave or this guy, Tron. Y'all, I'm so attracted to these shades, it's not even funny. So I went ahead with Tron. It is so unbelievably stunning. Like, it's just so pretty. Oh, I gotta restart my camera. The second to last palette in the Kaleidos range is the Lunar Lavender palette, and I think this might have been Haley's favorite shade in the palette, or at least like because of the lettering. And maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. But out of this guy, I definitely had to go with Moonroof here. She's so pretty. She's so pretty and so reflective and just stunning. So definitely Moonroof. There was no questions asked. Wisteria's pretty, but Moonroof has that purple with the blue shift that I just told you I am a sucker for. So rounding up the Kaleidos Futurism series, we have the Sashimi City. That tongue ties me every time I say it. This is what this beauty is looking like. Absolutely stunning palette. I feel like whenever I hear other people talk about this palette, they're always attracted to this shade Pink Ginger. I like it, but it will never win out Penthouse in my opinion. Penthouse is just so stunning, such a light, bright gold shade. So gorgeous. So I definitely had to go with Penthouse. In this palette to win out, just closing up my Futurism series with that guy. Another palette Haley sent me, thank you again Haley, is my Menagerie Feral palette. And I almost picked the shade Wolfing, which I talked about being so interesting. Again, you all know how I love these green shades. However, in this palette, I swatched it not too long ago. I swatched all these out, or this palette out, and I fell in love with this yellow shade. It is such a buttery, smooth, pigmented yellow. And I need to reach for it more, and I need to reach for this palette more. So let me know if you want to see any looks or anything using the Feral palette. I'm more than happy to film them. Another palette I've barely used and I've had for almost a year is this Morphe and Sour Patch Kids palette. Now, my husband did give this to me for my birthday or anniversary, something. It was something last year. I really haven't used this. I've swatched the shimmers in it before, and I've dipped into like the mattes once or twice, like literally once or twice. For some reason, Watermelon WOAH here just has such a unique kind of tone to it. This one in particular is just so interesting to me. It is so pretty, and like swatching it with like, especially next to the yellow from the Feral palette. Woo! A palette that was in my Pan Those Eyeshadows very frequently at the very beginning of the year is the Nabla Dreamy 2. Another one that was in my top 5 interesting color stories, and maybe that's like very opinion based, so this might not be interesting to you. It was very interesting to me. This guy, the Nabla Dreamy 2, and I'm surprised with the shade that I picked. I've used every shade in this palette, and I know the formula and the color that speak to me the most is this shade here in Dionysus. It is like a cream to matte kind of formula. The swatch will not do it justice. When I apply it on the eye, it is one of the easiest to blend, just most beautiful eyeshadows. And I can do something where I use this shade and then just top off like a cream or like a matte skin tone kind of shade on the lid, and then put like something shimmery on the inner corner. And it is one of the most seamlessly blended, impeccable eyeshadow looks that I've done this year. Palette that, again, I haven't used any of the shades in this yet. Haley sent this to me at the tail end of last year. I think she was decluttering this because the shades were used. So unless like someone at the post office grabbed it, dabbled in it, and then gifted it to me afterwards. This guy here, this is solely based on like when I look at this palette, what color drew me in, and then I swatched the couples that did draw me in, but one I kept going back over and over and over again, and that is the shade Love Ritual down here. Now, totally not a shade that I normally would pick, but for some reason, within this palette, it's so darn unique, and I just love it. It's so pretty. Just really happy about that. Woo, almost dropped it. So my gold palette by Natasha Denona looks like this if you haven't seen it. However, I'm sure you have. My absolute these shades just speak to me on a whole different level. If I were going to pick between the two, Lime Chrome has my heart. It's very, very reminiscent of Subculture's Electric, which I love so much. That guy there kind of gives me the same vibes, so that is always what my eye is drawn to in this palette. So my green brown palette. So this was a no-brainer, an absolute no-brainer. When I look at this palette, I immediately am drawn to this shade, and I love this kind of shade so much. This is Antique Olive. It is so pretty. It's one of those like dirty olive gold kind of shades. This guy is in my pan those eyeshadows. Again, if you want to click ahead, go ahead. But looking at this palette, obviously we have to go with the purple blue kind of shade, which is this guy called Pure Love. So pretty. It is so pretty. It's a little deeper of that kind of shade that I normally like in my eye looks, but again, I have to always pick that shade. Those just draw me in with their siren song. Just, oh. Another heifer of a palette. This is the Natasha Denona Purple Blue palette now. I'm missing a shade. It's in my BYOP, but that's okay because that's not my favorite shade in the palette. My favorite shade in this guy, it's hard because when I look at it, I'm so drawn to this one. However, I know that I don't like those. I'm not super keen on blues on my eyes currently, so my favorite in this palette right now is Nina's Orchid. This electric purple, I just love it. It is so pretty. I think when I did my 7 looks 1 palette using this, I did a look where I had Nina's Orchid and then the pink gold shade called Golden Rose in the center of the lid with like the purples on the outer, and it made me fall in love with that kind of purple shade. So I am so happy that I have this in my collection still, like not upset that I dished out all that money. Natasha Denona Safari palette, my first full-size Natasha Denona palette that kind of started my love affair and made me want to collect more of her stuff. It's very similar to Subculture, as you've heard me harp on. I ended up going and picking AMHARA here. It is so pretty. It's like a burnt terracotta, like a clay kind of color. So pretty. It is so freaking pretty. So I'm very happy about that guy. Then my Sunrise palette is next on the list. And again, if you knew, you knew, or if you know, you know immediately. It's gotta be Aster. That purple with the blue shift. She's just calls my name every time I look at that palette. My eyes immediately get drawn to that shade. Is my Zendo palette. And this one, I went back and forth on a couple shades. So it could have been like a toss-up between Flow, Breath, and Yama here. And I went with Yama, which gives me that kind of subculture-y, like shifty, like neutral to a green kind of shift. So I went with Yama. Again, kind of similar to what I'm wearing currently. The last Natasha Denona palettes I have are 5-pan palettes. So I'm going to start with the Camel palette. And this is a very unexciting palette, in my opinion. My favorite shade, surprisingly, is not the one that has pan, not the one that looks used. It's actually this guy here. It's just a nice neutral, like a true neutral kind of brown called Safari. It's a beautiful formula. It's so soft. It is unbelievably soft, and it's just stunning, if I'm being quite honest. This guy here, which is almost a cheat, like I actually probably shouldn't put it in, however, I filmed my swatch clip already, so we're going to talk about it anyway. This was a combination of the Ayana and the Peak palette. Haley had sent both of them to me. They had a lot of repeat shades for what is in my collection because your girl has a lot of Natasha Denona palettes. So I combined the shades that I didn't have, or apart from one that is the shade that I like in here. So most of these are independently in either the Ayana or the Peak palette. However, the one that I went with, this guy, Tribe, I think it's Tribe. It's Jasper. This is Jasper, is in another palette. However, in this configuration, that's still the shade that I like the most is Jasper here. So that's what I went with. Then the last Natasha Denona 5-pan is the Mini Nude palette. The shade that I love is actually this guy here, Lumino, the center shade. I have pan on all the shimmers. Sienna is the most disappointing in this palette. However, the full-size version in the green-brown palette is very nice. Moving on. So we're going to move away from Natasha Denona and kind of round out with the last, 6 palettes in my collection. So I have a palette from Odin's Eye. This is the Elva palette. Thank you again, Haley. She sent this to me back around Christmas time. This palette is so stunning, and I was tied between a couple shades. It was either Lilac or here, Dandelion. I'm a broken record. I love these kinds of shades. The purpley shades with like a lot of shift to it, and especially this one is incredibly blinding as well. Super, super beautiful. Had to be number 1 in the palette. Thank you, Haley, again. She sent this to me back in 2020. Whew, man, it's been a long time. But this guy here is the Profusion Chocolate palette, and I initially wanted it for these green tones. However, the greens are so disappointing in this palette. It's so upsetting. My favorite shade in here is actually the shade Hidden. It is such a beautiful, like matte, creamy, neutral, like warm leaning kind of shade. It is stunning. Then my Shroud, no. Yeah, this is my Shroud Cosmetics Creepy Cute palette. I get confused because my packaging still says Strobe. That is their old name. They are now Shroud. When I look at this palette, I'm always drawn to these two shades. However, I never reach for those two shades. But the shade that I picked is also one that I don't reach for a whole heck of a lot, and it's mostly because I just don't give myself permission to reach for it. That is the shade Third Eye. It is such a stunning creamsicle orange shade, but I never, ever give myself the okay to use it. This is my reminder to myself to just use what I like to use. It'll be okay. Then my Fun Size palette by Sugar Pill Cosmetics. I knew immediately what shade I was going to pick in this guy. I don't think you guys would guess though. I am always, whenever I see this palette, drawn to the shade 8-Bit. It's just so pretty. Do I wear it enough? No. But that shade definitely like calls me in. I just always want to play with that when I look at this palette. My Tarte Tarteist Pro palette, that is this guy here. It's super reflective, so I apologize in advance. The shade that I picked for my favorite is a shade that is tried and true for me. This shade here. Most of the usage that's in that shade was all organic. It was not me like focusing in to hit pan like I did for Bold and Mod here. I organically hit the pans in these two shades, but those are definitely not my favorites. The pattern or the imprint is worn away on this shade Whimsy. Then a palette that my husband picked up for me last year, which was so sweet of him, was the YSL Color Clutch, the Marrakech one. This palette is very pretty. Almost reminiscent of like Subculture and like the Safari palette as well. I probably should have picked either this orange or this peach. However, I went ahead and with this guy here, which is just like, it looks kind of like nothing in the pan, but it is like just a super soft, shimmery pink. Something that would be great for inner corners or as even just like a cheek face highlight, like a super pinky face highlight. But I don't have the color story in front of me. I'm going to combine the clips and show them to you now. But this is my color story of all of my favorite shades. I know it's going to lean very shimmer heavy, metallic heavy, because those are just the shades that I typically like to wear on my eyes. And those are typically the shades that draw me in. And I'm like, ooh, yes. And everything else is kind of like mattes are typically like a necessity kind of thing for me. But that is it for my favorite eyeshadows in each palette alphabetically. Let me know if you agree with a lot of the shades that I picked. Let me know if you don't agree with the shades that I picked. Let me know what your favorite shade of all time is. I truly don't know of all time what my favorite shade is. However, I do love a single from Dandelion's company called Dahlia. It's another very reminiscent to Subculture's Electric. Those shades with the green, like yellow, terracotta, peach shifts are just like, they blow my mind and they call me in. And then those purples with the blue shift, those two just get my heart going. They just get it pitter-pattering. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you guys are staying healthy, sane, and safe, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye!